Hi everyone, today I'd like to cover the very recent encounter between Abdusattorov and Fabiano Caruana. And it's very interesting to see a game between players of different generations. Just in case that you're not familiar with these two very strong players, let me briefly tell you about them. Abdusattorov is only 18 years old and he became the World Rapid Champion in 2021, so he's a very promising player. And Fabiano Caruana, also known as Fabi, we can consider him a veteran even though he's only 30 years old, but he has been around for decades. He even played a match challenging the then world champion Magnus Carlsen, even though he lost. But he's just an exceptional player, and in this tournament he's playing very strong chess. He even started defeating the favorite Magnus Carlsen, and even though he lost one classical game so far, in that game he was really pressing, so this is probably not the worst way to lose a game, by trying to push for a win. And with 3 rounds to go, so far he's leading the 2023 Norway chess tournament, which is taking place in Stavanger. So let me know in the comments if you have a favorite to win this tournament. But let's now dive into the game, which I think is a very typical case in which a veteran beats a youngster by slowly outplaying the opponent. So here it is white to play. Abdusattorov has many ways to go. Let's evaluate the position overall. It seems very dull, so far the game was actually quite balanced. And the position is still very balanced. We have opposite color bishops, so there might be an imbalance there, but besides that, both sides have their pieces well protected. And in this position, Abdusattorov played a move which I think is quite risky, which is the move g3. So before we cover that move, let me give you a very important tip to approach these positions, which is to try to find targets in your opponent's side of the board. So here, that idea might be a bit difficult because black's pieces are actually quite defended. We might try to move like queen to d2, eyeing the knight, but that knight can simply move. Another idea might be bishop to c5, which attacks the queen and overprotects the pawn b4. This is definitely playable, but here the queen might move. And now the move knight to e6, for example, will attack the bishop, but this is still quite playable. But following this principle of trying to find targets in your opponent's side of the board, there's the idea to attack this pawn on a6. Even though it might look complicated, the idea might be to bring a knight, for example, to c5 by going knight to c1. So here we have the idea to go knight to d3, for example, and then go knight to c5, putting pressure on the pawn a6. And here black might use a similar principle and go knight to c6, attacking the pawn on b4, but in this case now we can play the move bishop to c5, defending the pawn b4 and attacking the queen. This is definitely playable. Or another idea might be to go knight to e6, with the idea to control c5 or even bring the knight to d4. Here the game might continue knight to d3, and after knight to d4, white might consider taking the knight on d4 or even going knight to c5, putting pressure on the pawn a6, and we get a very complicated position that was, in my view, a better continuation than what was played in the game. But here Abdusattorov played the move g3, which on a way seems like an active move, but as we see, it completely changes the position. So here after the move g3, here Fabi captured on g3. By the way, this pawn on b4 cannot be captured because there's pressure on the knight on d8. For example, after rook takes b4, white has this idea of capturing the knight, and now this queen is overloaded with the defense on the rook on b4. For example, after queen takes and queen takes, white gets an extra piece. And after pawn takes and knight takes, this is white's idea, threatening knight to f5, which is a big threat, forking the king and the queen. But here, black simply covers that square, and now this bishop even becomes more active because it is eyeing this pawn h3. So we see that now white is playing active moves, but this comes at a cost because now the pawn structure has changed and it is actually worse for white because these pawns are undefended and white's king is going to be more exposed. So this is a really important idea in this game, which is the importance of king safety. Black's king is going to be safer than white's. And here white continued with queen to d2, again an active move, but it is just one shot because black simply moves the knight. The knight is even going to be better placed on f7. It was very passive on d8. Again, another active move, bishop to c5. And here Fabi played the very interesting queen to e8 with the idea to bring the queen to the h file, attacking the pawn. So black's position already looks more comfortable. And here white found a very interesting idea to complicate the position, which is the move h4. And here Fabi played the solid move queen to h8, which again is a typical idea when a veteran plays against a youngster. Normally tries to avoid complications, but in this particular position I think that it was actually quite interesting to capture the pawn h4. White's idea was probably to go knight to f1 and then go knight to e3, trapping this rook on c4. But here black might continue with knight to g5, so we see an advantage of capturing on h4, then now the knight gets this very nice square on g5, eyeing the pawn f3, and after knight to e3, even though this rook is going to be trapped, black might capture another pawn, attacking the queen. Here white can give a check, and after knight to g5, even though white will capture the exchange on c4, here black might capture on c4 straight away, or even play the move h3 first, and then capture, taking with the pawn is an interesting move to create a pass pawn, and we get this very complicated position where white has an exchange, but black has 2 extra pawns. So this position is very interesting and very complicated, but probably Fabi wanted to keep things under control, but this was definitely playable for black. In any case, after h4, Fabi played queen to h8, pinning this pawn, practically forcing the move h5. Even though white gets a pass pawn in this case, this pawn is actually very well controlled by 3 of black pieces, so this is more of a weakness than a strong pawn. And now Fabi played the move queen to h7, black doesn't have to rush, and again if we see black's king, we see that it is very well protected by its pieces and its pawns, whereas white's king on h1 is going to be a bit more exposed. Additionally, black has this extra idea of going g4 at any time, changing the pawn structure. So even though white's position might be objectively okay, I think that black's position is definitely preferable. So here after the move king to g2, queen to h6, white played king to f2, and here Fabi again played a very interesting move, g4, inviting this trade of queens, which white didn't want to go for, and played the move bishop to e3. In any case, after queen takes, here black's idea was probably to capture with the king. The knight here is doing a good job controlling any invasion by the rook, and after king takes, the king is eyeing this pawn h5, it might even have ideas to infiltrate the position, and this position might be holdable for white, but it is black the one who is again trying to attack white's pawns. For example, after pawn takes and bishop takes, even though black is not winning material so far, black is having pressure against pretty much all of white's pawns. So that was probably the way to go for white, but again, not a pleasant position to play. But here, Abdusattorov tried bishop to e3, and after queen to h8, we're gonna get a very similar position, but with queens on the board, white's king is going to be exposed. And here Abdusattorov captured on g4. I just want to mention that here the move f4 was, in my view, more interesting for white. The point is that after pawn takes and bishop takes, this bishop is controlling this knight that is going to be very active in the game, as we'll see. So this was probably a better alternative for white, even though the position still looks pleasant for black. Because after pawn takes, this bishop is going to be very active. Here black didn't capture on g4 straight away. Black first played the move queen to c8, planning to go rook to c2, pinning the queen. And after bishop to c5 and bishop takes, here white had an interesting chance to simplify the position by going rook to c1, but instead played the move rook to f1, which honestly I don't really understand. Because after bishop to h3, now black is attacking the rook and even getting more active, and here after rook to g1, trying to create some threats against the king on g7, black simply went king to h7, and in this position white tried h6. Again, rook to c1 was an interesting try to simplify the position, but it is hard to blame Abdusattorov for trying to go active by going h6. This pawn is in a way protecting black's king, so black is not interested in taking the pawn, but instead creating more threats by going queen to g4. And then going knight to g5. So here, again, white tried to go active by going knight to f5, but this idea will not work. After queen takes, rook to g7 and king to h8, black has to be careful, but the position is already winning for black. Here white tried knight to e3, trying to protect the king. The point is that after rook takes, here black has many options. Black might take this knight, or even go rook to c2, pinning the queen, queen to g2 might also be an idea. That's why white tried knight to e3. But here Fabi captured the pawn h6, now with a strong threat of taking on g7, and after knight takes and king takes, the position looks desperate for white, but Abdusattorov, being a very young player, is tactically very sharp and went bishop to f8, giving a check, and after king takes, then captured the knight on h6, and after king to g8, even though this bishop on h3 is hanging, black has this idea to take on c4, so for example after queen takes. In this position, taking with the b pawn is even more interesting because now this pass pawn is going to be very strong. So this position is also quite winning for black, having 2 extra pawns. That's why Abdusattorov tried the move knight to e3, and black still has to be very careful even though black has 2 extra pawns. Now white has this fork against the bishop and the pawn, but Fabi found a very concrete solution. This is very typical of Fabi playing very concrete moves, and went bishop to f5. So now the bishop is protected, and the point is that this pawn f6 cannot be captured because after queen to f4, giving a check, and knight in the knight, the only way to defend the knight is by going king to e2, but now black gets this discover attack against the queen after bishop to e3, giving a check, so black is now going to win the queen, for example after king takes and queen takes. So after bishop to f5, the game is pretty much over. Here white tried queen to f5, Fabi simply moved the bishop, and after queen to h3 and f5, now these pass pawns start rolling, queen to h6, king to f7, queen to h8, and after a few moves, black played the move f4, and after knight to g4, again Fabi played a very concrete idea, went f3, giving a check and also attacking the knight, and here Abdusattorov resigned. The point is that after king takes, black can even play queen to f4, giving a check and then capturing the knight, but even stronger is the move e4, giving a check and attacking the queen, so white is simply going to lose the queen. So this was a very instructive game by Fabi, completely outplaying his younger opponent. And with this victory, he's on the way to winning this very strong tournament. I hope that you enjoyed the game. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. This will help me a lot. In any case, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.